Okay. Good morning. We got the papal blessing here, so we are ready to go. We got a new person on sound, Christian, who came here from Germany, I find out. So one of my fellow German folks. But anyway, nice to have you all here. And Mark, thank you for your many weeks of filling in. It turned out to be more than I thought it was going to be. When you go on a cruise ship, it's like taking a sail in a petri dish. And, oh, well, I'm glad you didn't tell me ahead of time. Yeah, no, everybody got sick except for Rose, and so she must be one tough lady. By the way, the brochures for the Holy Land trip are out now, and Pastor Kyle has some somewhere around here. And I'd like to invite you to think about going on that if that's in your frame of mind. What I intend to do later in the year is do a series of lessons on all the places we'll be visiting. And so I'll tend to show a lot of pictures, and as I always do, and that way you can, if you're going to go, you can be prepared in ahead of time, and if you don't want to pay the money and go, and it'll be the same as going by seeing the pictures without having to fly on the airplane and sit on the bus and get sick and all that other stuff. And so anyway, last time I went, I got COVID, so I probably shouldn't have said that. That won't recruit anybody. But anyway, it's nice to be back. So I told Kyle when I got back, I said, I'm kind of out of gas on current events. We did the book of Daniel, then we did the book of Revelation, then we're doing current events, and seems like that's about all I've done for over the last little while. And said there must be something else in that Bible. And so anyway, and so he said, well, why don't you do the life of Christ? And so I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so we're going to do the life of Christ. And as always, as much as I can, I'll use pictures, because I have tried to, as I would say, that I have visited all the places that Jesus visited in Israel, so we'll be able to have some connection that way. So, and there is a lunch today, the volunteer lunch, and so we won't go too late, and so I think I'll try to be done at least by quarter till. Yes? Today at 12:15. Yeah, okay. So you can be a volunteer and have lunch here, or you can not be a volunteer and have lunch at the Old Town restaurant. Old Town, is that what it's called? Hometown. Oh, okay. The Old Hometown restaurant. Okay. All right. So we're going to do the life of Christ, and we're starting with where else? Bethlehem. That would be the most reasonable place to start, although there would be one place maybe prior to that where you could start in the life of Christ, and where would that be? Huh? Well, no, even before Nazareth. Where Mary went to be with her cousin, and with the Annunciation, and I think that was at John the Baptist was from what's the name of that little town? But anyway, so maybe there, but that's not where we're starting. Anyway, we're not going to start there. Okay, there's something else I was going to say, but I forgot. Yes. Oh, about the trip? The one I just went on, or the one that's coming up? Huh? This one? Oh, the one oh yeah. Well, my mother-in-law that you've met, Rose, she sold her house, and so she took all of her kids and the spouses, and we went on a cruise in the Caribbean. On the Princess Cruises, we did the Eastern Caribbean one week and the Western Caribbean the next week, and so that was nice, and I even got a chance to snorkel in Honduras and Grand Turk. And so I took my gear along with me, so that was fun to get in the water at least there. It's hard to get in the water from the ship, So, and you can get him, but it's hard to keep up. But anyway, so that was a fun thing, and it was nice for the whole family to be together. She had 4 daughters, and they're all still with us, so just the daughters and the sons-in-law, and we had a very nice time that way. So yeah, cruising. I prefer to be on the shore, to tell you the honest truth. There's more to, anyway. But you don't complain about what you have, especially if it's free. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, as they say. Okay, so Bethlehem. Let's read the scripture. Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." Well, apparently politicians have been lying for a long time. It's not a new thing. Well, these wise men that arrived from Persia, modern-day Iran, as you know, this word was quite a word, because they said, "We have seen the star in the east of the one who is born King of the Jews." And when you think about that, they had quite a bit of detail that they knew, and how did they know it? That would be the question. Well, thanks for asking that question. You remember in our study from Daniel, let's call it 600-700 BC, he was in Persia, and what he wrote, his prophecies and the book of Daniel, was actually widely read for many centuries, not just among the Jews, but among the Persians, the Medes, among the Romans. All of the ancient people read it because it spoke so clearly about the things that had just happened and that were happening in their lifetime. And so they all read it and thought about it. And Daniel, of course, was connected to the Magi from Persia. So they were a priestly class, but he was connected to the wise men, and because he would have been one of them in his day. So there was this connection, which caused them to believe that a star would reveal a great king who would be born. It's in these notes. You see there that little footnote at the bottom, which is a YouTube. That's a video that I have on there from a play we did years ago. It's called "Where That Baby Be Born?" And I played the part of King Herod, and I'm with the wise men and my scribes, and we are discussing the question of where Jesus is going to be born. I thought I would play it for you, but I didn't feel like it would be that edifying. But if you want to look it up, you can. It'll be on the piece that I emailed to you. You can take it off of there. It's on YouTube. It is kind of a humorous sketch, if I say so myself, and has had a few views on there. But anyway, they were expecting. There was all through the ancient world, there was this idea that a star would have something to do with the birth of a king. And every king wanted to be properly born under the stars, and so they tried to show themselves as having accomplished that. So here, for example, this is the star coin of Alexander Jannaeus. He was a Hasmonean king, a Jewish king, and And you see on the left there, that is a star, the anchor on the other side. But that format of a star is common. But anyway, Alexander Junius, that's an important, the widow's mite, remember that story? This is that coin. It's that size of a coin. So it's a very small copper coin, but anyway, it's of his. This is from the 1st century BC. This is a star within a crescent, and I think on the other side, the figure there that's actually Artemis, and I can't tell on this particular one, but a number of her coins that people minted had a moon, crescent moon underneath it. But here on the other side, it's the star and the crescent moon. This one is from 42 BC. That's a Roman denarius, a silver coin, and these are all coins that from my collection. I collect coins of anything that has to do with the Bible, but these coins that have stars on them in this period of time, I was kind of tracking this idea that I'm discussing with you here. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, well, there you go. And a denarius is about the size of a dime. So a silver dime is what you got paid, and some of you think that's about what I get paid. But anyway, yeah, I have Social Security, and when the check arrives, I think, yep, there's my dime. It's. But anyway, here's a coin that's an interesting one, issued around 6 BC when Quirinius was governor of Syria. You recognize that phrase from the Bible. But it's the ram looking back on the star. And this guy is called the Bethlehem star. This guy, Michael Moeller, that I reference in the notes there, this is his analysis, and he thinks that coin and the minting of it had something to do with what the wise men were observing. And so he tracks out when it appeared in the east on April 17th, its movement, and it stood over the place on December 19th. And so anyway, he does that whole analysis, and you can look him up on the internet if you're interested in the details of his analysis. I don't know how true that all is, but it does nonetheless, the star that the ram is looking back on, it portends some kind of significant thing. Here's one from Hadrian. He was emperor of the Roman Empire at its height in 117 AD. So there are these, and there are many others that I could show you, that always the star was said to shine over a particular or great king. And so when the wise men showed up in Jerusalem and said, "We have seen the star of the King of the Jews in the east, and we've come to worship him," this would have made a lot of sense to everybody. Obviously, Herod took it seriously enough to do what he did and eventually try to kill the newborn baby in Bethlehem. But the point is that he took it seriously, the people took it seriously, and it was a serious thing that happened. And so the star was forecasted in the Old Testament. In the notes that I sent out, I see that I didn't get it in the notes by the time I got this on Thursday to the office to print, but the later version, I added a little section that quotes some of the Old Testament passages. So what I emailed to you would have a couple of references there. But the Old Testament did anticipate that a star would have something to do with the arrival of the Messiah. And so they were expecting that. So the star is significant. And the idea that this is the King of the Jews. Okay, so we're talking a baby, right? But the baby would be the King of the Jews. Well, let me just ask you this question. At any time in the life of Christ, was Jesus King of the Jews in any earthly sense? No, the answer to that is no. By the way, my two sons came and painted the inside of our house while we were gone. We didn't. It wasn't a surprise. We asked them to do that, but because my son's a painter. But and then when you reach a certain age, your kids think they run your life, and so they found my stash of candy where I have it stored. I had these big old chunks of like a case of chocolate bars and big hunks, and they took it all away, and they said, that's not good for you. Well, your sons are telling you what's good for you. When did that all happen? And at what stage of life do they think they run your life? Well, apparently this stage. It's not good for you, Dad. And well, I am 75 years old. It hasn't killed me yet, although pretty close to it. But anyway, so at no time was Jesus King of the Jews. So obviously, the prophecy that the King of the Jews, his arrival would be signaled by this particular star, hasn't happened yet, but it does say who Jesus is. That Jesus is the King of the Jews, and he will take that role at some future time. There's a great deal of that in the book of Revelation. Jesus will rule as King of the Jews from Jerusalem in the kingdom that will come during the 1,000 years. So God was showing this by the star, that the baby who is to be born was not only going to live his life over those 33 or so years, but even beyond that, he is going to be the King of the Jews, and he will literally be that king. That's what's going to happen. Jesus is yet to be the King of the Jews in an administrative sense. He is literally going to be the administrative king of the Jews one of these days yet in the future. He will be not just King of the Jews, but he will have another title of King of Kings. And that's kind of an interesting. You don't want to hear that, but the Parthians had the idea of that they were the kings of the King of Kings. That was one of the titles that the Parthian kings had. And Herod had defeated the Parthians at the place that's now called the Herodian in 40 BC, and I think I have that in the notes in there somewhere. Okay, so the wise men show up. They tell Herod, where is the King of the Jews, which he didn't appreciate that too much because he was the only guy who had that title. The Caesar had actually given to Herod the title King of the Jews. And so basically the way he interpreted that was, you've come to find the person who's going to replace me as King of the Jews. I'm King of the Jews. There can't be two of us. And so I need to find out who this usurper is so that I can make sure that he doesn't succeed. And Herod had a real thing about that. He killed his sons. He killed one of his wives. Anybody that he suspected of being disloyal to him, he killed. And so it was said historically that it was better to be a dog in the household of Herod than a son, because at least the dog could survive. But the son couldn't because of this, you imagine that, killing your own sons because you think they might try to take your place. That kind of thing did happen. Well, Herod wants to find out about this, so there in verse 4, he calls for the people's chief priests and teachers of the law. So these were the people who knew about the religious ideas and would be in a position to interpret it, and which they of course did. The title King of the Jews was important not only in the birth of Jesus, but also in his crucifixion. Matthew 27:11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. And so the question Was he the king of the Jews? Jesus answered in the affirmative. And that was at his trial. Because to say that you were the king of the Jews was actually a death penalty offense in the Roman world. Because it's like a rebellion. You know, you are saying, I'm the king of the Jews. The other guy says he's the king. Okay, let's rumble. Let's decide who is the king. And in those days, things were decided basically by the military or by assassination or that sort of thing. You know, in the Eastern Roman Empire, they had no actual succession plan. So, you know, like we have elections every 4 years and that sort of thing. But in the Eastern Roman Empire, in the Roman Empire, they didn't have any way of going from one emperor to the next. Nothing in law. And so everything just gets worked out, you know, by poison or by a knife or by the army. It just gets worked out. And, you know, by the way, when the Roman Empire became Christian, there still wasn't a succession for the Roman emperors, even though they're now Christian. But there was still all of this intrigue that would go on. And the one Roman emperor would be killed. And the Christians took the view is that the surviving one, that was the will of God. So they just accepted however it got worked out. If that's the one, that's the will of God, and so we serve him. And so they didn't have loyalty questions because clearly God was the one who had orchestrated these events. But Jesus was asked by the governor, are you the king of the Jews? Then in Matthew 27, you have another statement of that later on. They stripped him and put on a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. Hail, King of the Jews, they said. And when Jesus was crucified, the sign that was on his cross was King of the Jews. Remember how the Jews said, oh, we don't want that. We just said, let him, you can put up there. He said he was King of the Jews. The Romans says, we put what we put, it's going to stay. And so literally, when Jesus was crucified, his title was King of the Jews. And so you can see, just kind of back to our story of the birth here, that the star that revealed the King of the Jews to be born, this was a significant event. It was important. And God was the one who orchestrated it, who prophesied it, who orchestrated it, who revealed it to those who were looking. The Magi were looking. They showed up, they offered their gifts, and it was, it was a significant, obviously a spiritual event. And it starts Jesus off, he's a baby, and already they're trying to kill him. I mean, he's a baby, and they're trying to kill him. Well, it just shows you that the devil doesn't mind taking the youngest ones. You know, he's just a killer all the way along the line. So the star shows all of that. And I've got a paragraph there about the title that he had for himself as King of the Jews, and some of the things that he tried to do to kill his own family members. They had a place where they had like the genealogies, and Herod, because he wasn't actually Jewish, had the genealogies destroyed so that no one could point to it and say, this is not the actual King of the Jews. You know, so, I mean, he was just going to make the point that he was a king. And then he married a Hasmonean princess, Miriam, so that he could claim royalty. In other words, he married into the royal family. One of the Hasmoneans, I remember Alexander Jannaeus. From that line, he married into that line. I note here that not only is this prophesied, but apparently it all happened at the right time, because that beautiful statement out of Galatians, but when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman. So Jesus was born at the set time, at the exact right time, at the time that even the star revealed. It was on time, it was the prophesied time, it was the right time. And I think I did a Christmas message here a couple of years ago on that subject about the right time. Why was it the right time? And there's different reasons that I cited, but one was, remember, the Roman roads gave you easy access. There was the Pax Romana. There was the Roman peace, so that you didn't have to worry about wars getting in your way. You could travel easily. You could speak a common language, which was Greek, and be understood pretty much anywhere in the world. So easy travel, safe travel, ability to communicate, those are among the things that made it exactly the right time. God was working out a plan, and it was realized in the birth of Jesus. Now, just to take this story a little bit further, Herodian was, I want to talk about Herod and his role as king of the Jews and just some of the details about him. He built the temple, you know that, and it was would have been one of the wonders of the world had it survived. But he was a great builder, and when you go to Israel today, you can still see the remains of things that he built. I mean, 2,000 years later, it's still there. And one of the things is this place called Herodian. This picture, that big tower on the right, is the Tower of the Ascension, and it's the most characteristic landmark of the Mount of Olives. So basically, you're on the Mount of Olives, and if you look, to the west, you see the Temple Mount and all of that. If you look south, you see the Herodian there in the distance, as pointed out there. And here it is from West Jerusalem. You can see that it is a dominating hilltop. This was his hilltop fortress, and it was where Herod was eventually buried. If you're in Bethlehem, and this picture is taken from Bethlehem, Herodian is right there. So it's very dominant. This picture is taken from the top of the Herodian. On the left in the hills over there is Bethlehem, and on the hills on the right is Jerusalem. And so they're both right there in view. This is an aerial photograph, which gives you some perspective on it. Just show you a couple of things, Herodian, obviously. This is the remains of there was a tower here. This cutout here, his tomb, they discovered right here. These hilltops like this is surrounding Jerusalem, essentially. So Jerusalem has extended pretty much almost all the way to Bethlehem. So it is 7 miles old 7 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, but it's filled in. And you take these hilltops. I'm not sure what that particular one is, the name of it, but there's several of these like this where they would build a Jewish settlement on top of these hills. That might be like Har Homa, Har meaning mountain, but they build a settlement on top of the hills, because you see down in here it's just barren basically, sheep and all that kind of stuff. There'll be typically like a concrete wall or a brick wall or something like that, stone wall, that surrounds the whole village, so it has security. And so it's just like a hilltop fortress in these areas. And they do that obviously for security reasons today. But this is, and Herod built this particular fortress for the same reason. This hilltop is the highest hilltop in all the Judean wilderness. I think at 2,487 feet. So roughly at the height of Snoqualmie Pass, for example, is the height of that hill. Here's a picture These down here were pools and swimming pools and all of that, but it was all part of this huge complex that that was the Herodian, a beautiful situation. But the fortress on top, had the tower and all of that. And the reason Herod did what he did was, as I told you, he wasn't really Jewish. He was from Edom, and from Jerusalem. If here at Herodian, at the high point, you can literally see down here to Masada. You can see the Dead Sea from that high point there, and it's a straight line. So if you were in trouble, Herod, as he often was, you could go. You could have your own palace in Jerusalem, but a better fortified place is the Herodian. And then, if you needed to make a run for it, you could go maybe 18 to 20 miles down to Masada, and hole up there, because that was an even stronger fortress than Herodian. And then you could make your escape into the land of Edom, from which you came. So there was a method to his madness, but the extent to which he did these things is pretty amazing. So this is Masada. You recognize that. This area down here were his palaces. So this this was walled off, so it was separate from the rest. Up here are all the stores, and when they found this, they found these storehouses are maybe half the width of this room, and say that length is about like that. So this would be two of these storehouses, and there were dozens of them up there. So they would be filled with dates, and they would be filled with, figs and and wine and all kinds of stores, so that he could survive up there for years. And during the revolt against the Romans in 70 AD, or 66 to 73, they literally did survive up there for years against the Romans, and it was one of the last places that fell. This is the siege ramp that the Romans built to crash into the walls with their siege ramps. But anyway, and 900 people survived up here until the Romans came, and then they all committed suicide. But the Dead Sea is over here, and if you were going to Edom, you'd be going down around and up around in that direction. But this is why he did it. He built these fortresses in order to survive the various conflicts. This picture is an illustration that the fortress of Herodium was on top. Herod's tomb was about halfway down, and it shows you that they have found the sarcophagus, but nothing in it. When he was killed, or when he died, there's a description of his casket, and it talks about all the jewels that were on it and all the gold that were on it. So everybody was interested in finding the casket, and they knew that he had been buried in Herodium, but they couldn't find it. And so lots of searching went on, and they ultimately, in modern days, found it and put it back together again. This is that sarcophagus, but obviously the casket itself was missing, and along with him and all the gold and silver, but they did leave behind the stone box, and so broken up. So somebody found it. But so why are we telling this big story about Herodian? Yes, sir. It's neither. It's not a natural hill, and it's not a ziggurat. That would be like in Babylon, where they had those kinds of things. But yeah, the hill itself, let's see here, is somewhat man-made. So there's a natural part of it, but when they built the fortress on top, then they came along and literally built the mountain taller. So it is partially man-made with dirt and partially on the foundation of the original hill. It was originally the highest hill, in the area. And it was the significance of the hill for Herod was he had defeated the Parthians on that hill. That's where the final battle when he defeated them, because there had been for centuries of really battle with the Parthians. They were great horsemen, and so a horseman riding, claiming to be King of Kings, that was the ultimate fear of the Romans. But anyway, so Herod, but this fortress was so close to Bethlehem. When the wise men came, they came to one of two places. They came to Jerusalem, to Herod's palace there, or they came to the Herodian and to make the state visit, if you will. Probably Jerusalem, but speculation is it could have also been the Herodian. But the significance of the Herodian in the Bethlehem story is that it would have been the nearest Roman military location, and so it is likely that the soldiers who came into Jerusalem to kill the babies came from Herodian. I mean, that was Herod's deal. It's right there. I mean, it looks down on it, and you see it all there. And so it is interesting to compare the Herod with Mary and Joseph. Both Mary and Joseph were descendants of King David. So they had royal blood. Herod was not a descendant, had no royal blood, and so the guy who was actually king was the usurper. I mean, Mary and Joseph, because there were lots of people who had royal blood, but they did have it. Herod had all the power in this story of the birth. Mary and Joseph had none. Joseph didn't even have the wherewithal, as is well known, to provide for his wife. You know, if she's going to have the baby and all he gets is the barn, this is not a great moment for Joseph. He probably never lived it down. You made me do, but anyway, so Mary and Joseph were the commoners. Herod should have been the commoner, but he was the king. Herodium itself was luxurious, bright, heavily defended. Bethlehem, they call it, oh, little town of Bethlehem. Truly, it was a little town. I mean, it was a town of no consequence. It wasn't big. It wasn't industrial. It wasn't the center of any great anything. It was just a relatively small village. I mean, a historic village, been there a long time. But because David, his people had been there 1,000 years before, but it wasn't big. And even up to the present time, it hasn't been big. It's always been, for the last 2,000 years, a relatively small area. In the last few decades, the population has grown considerably as the Muslims have targeted Bethlehem and Nazareth to essentially take over those cities. The strategies that the Muslims have used to dominate is population, is to move into an area through immigration and have large families, and over time you win by having the largest population. I mean, that's what's happening in Europe today. I mean, it's what's happening in parts of the United States. But it definitely happened in places like Bethlehem and Nazareth. Those were two historically Christian villages, small but Christian. So for 2,000 years, Bethlehem has been a Christian village. Today, there's hardly any Christians left in Bethlehem. They have been essentially forced out, replaced, and harassed, and like even during some periods of war, Muslims would go into a Christian village, fire on Jerusalem or some other Jewish settlement, and then move out quickly. And of course, what would the Israelis have to do? They would respond to the place of the where the shelling came from. And so they fire back, and they would hit the Christian village, and it would be partially destroyed. But the Christians pay the price. You know, the Muslims who fire in there immediately make their escape, and the Christians pay the price. I mean, this has been a strategy in all of the wars. And in a lot of ways, you could say a lot of that is what's happening in Lebanon as well. That because southern Lebanon has been a Christian area, the area up around Homs, in Syria, right across the border, all of that has been Christian. And that's where a lot of the fighting is going on. Right now in Syria, you know, the last week, they've really killed a lot of people. And they say that it's against the Alawites, but it's also been against the Christians. And so quite a few Christian areas have been harmed, people killed, because actually the Christians were fairly supportive of the Assad regime, because the Assad regime was fairly supportive of the Christians, relatively speaking. And so the Christians have tended to be more associated with the Alawites, and so they both get blasted with the same. And so, I mean, I read from Amir Safadi, he says about 2,000 people have been massacred this last week in that area of Lebanon. But it's an old strategy. You know, it's not a new strategy. And Bethlehem and that area has been the locus of a lot of that same kind of strategy. But the point is to make the Christians pay. So if you were going to assess the situation at the time of Christ, you would say that Herod was the man, and he was in charge, and Jesus was the underdog, and the people of God were the underdogs. And of course, that would have been true. But we do learn by studying things like this, you don't measure things by how they are at a given moment. You know, part of why we study the Bible the way we do is we want to know, okay, this is what's happening today, but what is going to happen in the future? What's the future? And the future is Jesus Christ will be the King of the Jews and the King of Kings, and he will rule on the earth. Now, when you look around the earth today, is Jesus ruling today? Well, we would say no. It's not, and in various places, some places it's really bad, some places it's bad, some places it's not that bad. You know, I mean, that would be about how it is around the world in many places. But you study the Bible because the Bible tells us what's going to happen. And we know that Jesus is coming. You know, when Peter was writing in 2 Peter, he encouraged, when he talked about his own death, he talked about the coming of the Lord, and that was what he was looking to more and more as he thought about even his own death, as in 2 Peter chapter 1. And similarly, you know, here, you know, I'm 75, not that young. I hate looking at actuarial tables, you know, because they say that the average male will live to be 77 and the average female to be 81. And I've been kind of thinking about transitioning to a female and, you know, getting those extra few years in there. So I've been thinking about that lately, so I don't know if I'll do that. But, you know, but the point is, you know that you're not going to live forever. And Peter, when he was in that condition, started thinking a lot about the coming of the Lord. And we should think more about the coming of the Lord as time goes by. I remember I went to visit this guy one time. He was dying, and so you know he was a very wealthy person, that ring that I sometimes wear with the diamond cross in it, he gave that to me. And but anyway, but when I went to see him as he's dying, he only wants to talk about the rapture. Well, you can understand that, can't you? You know, and you don't want to talk about your money. You don't want to talk about politics. You want to talk about the coming of the Lord, because that is the most eminent thing to be considered when you're at that stage. You know, Jesus is coming, either in the air or in this bed, but one way or another, he's coming. And so, but it is what we ought to be doing. We ought to be thinking about these things and then thinking about the coming of the Lord. Herod wanted to be remembered, and so he builds this mausoleum, and you know what, he was a sick guy. You know, when he wanted there to be plenty of tears when he died, but he knew there wasn't going to be, and so he gave instruction for a whole bunch of notable people in Israel to be killed when he died, so that there would be a lot of crying in Israel upon his death. I mean, that's what you call a sick human being, right? That's what you call a dead human being. But anyway, so he wanted to be remembered. And the irony of it is, he wanted to be remembered, but they only wanted to remember where he was buried so they could get the jewels that were buried along with him. Here is Rose and Linda. You recognize that as the garden tomb, where Jesus was, by kind of the Protestant tradition is here. The more actual tradition is here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which that is. And here's Linda lighting a candle in that spot. But the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is where Jesus is buried, or his tomb is empty. And people go to see the empty tomb. They don't go to find the jewels. They go to see the empty tomb because that is the place of the resurrection. So it just shows you the twisting of history, right? One guy wants to be remembered, and if he wasn't connected to Jesus, he wouldn't be talked about at all. Jesus is a baby, poor, has nothing, but he has a future as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and so everybody wants to think about where he was born and where he's buried, and it is most significant. Let me just show you. Here's another little thing about Bethlehem. This is the inside of the church, and they've just recently, by recently I mean like 3 or 4 years ago, gone through the inside and cleaned all these mosaics. When the Persians came into Israel in around 600, they actually captured all of Israel, captured Jerusalem, captured the true cross of Christ. I've told you that. Took it back to Jerusalem, or to Iran. But virtually every Christian church in the land of Israel was destroyed in that period of time. But the one in Bethlehem was not destroyed. Can anyone speculate as to why the Persians destroyed every church in Israel but didn't destroy the one in Bethlehem? Well, I will tell you that answer. And if I can get any candy, it might be worth some for next week, but we'll see how that goes. When they got to the church in Bethlehem, they went inside, they looked around, and what they saw on the walls were mosaics like these, and they saw people depicted on the walls in the very manner of dress that was common to where they came from in Persia. In other words, who was being depicted? The wise men in Persian dress. And so they go into this church in 600 AD thereabouts, and they look on the wall and say, hey, these are our people that are depicted here. So let's not tear this one down. And so they literally kept it. And when you go there today to Bethlehem, the floor has been redone multiple times, but they've got some wooden platforms where you can move them back and look down. You can see the original mosaics of the floor of the original church of the Nativity built in the 300s. You know, when Helena came through there, they built a lot of different churches. They built this church over the cave where Jesus was born. And so there are elements of that original church which are still visible today, which you can see. Um, you recognize those names: Belteshazzar, Melchior, Gaspar. By Christian tradition, those are the names of the three wise men that were there. There was actually, a lot of people don't know there was a fourth wise man, but he brought fruitcake, and they just tossed. They they just completely got rid of him. No, we're not doing that, and so they got rid of him. Yes. No, they were not. They were Zoroastrian. Yeah. That's an interesting story. Yeah. So they come in as Zoroastrian, which is what Persians were at that point in time. They conquer the area. The guy's name, who was the leader, was called Khusro, Khusro the second. He captures the cross of Christ, according to their record, takes it back to Jerusalem, takes it back to Persia. I have there's a couple of coins that I have that depict some of that, because the Zoroastrians had the fire altar, and their coins show the moon and the star in the corners and the sides of the coins, along with the fire altar in the center. That's a standard coin from that part of the world in that time. After Khusro took the Jerusalem and took what he said was the cross of Christ, took it back to Persia, there were healings that took place that they reported associated with that, miracles associated with it. And I have a second coin that he minted thereafter, which is an image, his image, and over the top of his head there's a cross, which is interesting. I did a broadcast into Iran a few years ago, a gospel message, and I showed them that coin in the message to show them that Persians are not historically Muslim, and that they had a high regard for the Jews because they literally restored the Jews to power in Jerusalem for a very brief period of time until the Muslims came. But this particular guy conquered Jerusalem and then had a cross over his head. I don't have any knowledge that he literally became a Christian, but we do have that piece, and I have that coin. I had to look for it, and it was hard to get, but I found it. And but it does tell a story. So they dominate for a period of time, have regard for the Jews, because in actual fact the Jews allied with the Persians against the Byzantines in that period of time. So they get rewarded with Jerusalem. The Muslims come in, they conquer Israel. They eventually conquer Persia, and along with it, Zoroastrianism is suppressed, and Islam is imposed, and the Persians become Muslim. Whenever you meet a Persian person, you always want to make something of the fact that they're not Arabs. So I'll say to, I've met a number of over the years, and I always have the same approach. I say, I've noticed that, I know that Persians are not Arabs. And I always wondered why they have the Arab religion, and because they look down upon the Arabs. They think of them as inferior, and Persians do not like Arabs. And so, and by the way, there can be some of that in what's going on in Syria right now, because it's the Persians who are trying to reestablish themselves in Syria. And the Sunnis, who are currently in charge, don't like the Shiites. And so it's kind of that whole, remember that discussion we had, the Sunni-Shiite battle is a lot of what's going on inside of Syria right now. But anyway, they were Zoroastrian, and there was some, and there is actually some history in Persia of Christian minorities and Jewish minorities that have existed inside of Persia. Here's the church as it is today on the inside after it's been cleaned up. So the colored part are the mosaics that have been uncovered and preserved, and then the white part is plaster in parts that couldn't be restored. So this is a manger square. So this is, all of this is part of the Church of the Nativity. This is not a very good picture here, but that door, there's a door right there, and the door is only like this tall. And so you have to bend down to go into the church. That's the main door of the church. And they did that, they added it later because they wanted people to dismount from their horses before going into the church. You know, because people would ride their, horses right into the church, They had different attitudes in various times. One of the funny stories about that is in Europe, the bishop had to tell people they could not bring their dogs to church anymore, because most everybody brought their dog to church, and because they're cold, the cathedrals are cold, and so you get a big dog, you put him on the floor by your feet, keeps your feet warm. But then they get to barking and yapping, and especially whenever Gladys would start singing. I don't know if that part is true, but literally the bishops had to tell the people, no more dogs to the church. And so you just do something else. But people have had different attitudes about church over the centuries, but you have to dismount from your horse. So, and everybody now has to bow down to go into the church. But anyway, so this is a manger square as it is today. But on the other end of Manger Square, so that's looking one direction, this is looking the opposite direction, is this mosque. And here's a picture showing the larger square. St. George's Restaurant is right over there. That's a good spot. But anyway, what you notice up here, they have these loudspeakers. And 5 times a day, they blast the prayers with loudspeakers over the Church of the Nativity. They're just kind of making a point. And that is that we are here and we are superior to you. So we build a higher tower than the Church of the Nativity, and then we blast our, there's no God but Allah, into the over the church 5 times a day, 7 days a week. That is the way it is. They tried to do that in Nazareth here about 20 years ago, and it's one of the things the Israeli government did that I thought was really great. They forced them to stop building this mosque in Nazareth, because they were going to do the same thing, build it right next to the church of the what is it in Jerusalem? Not the Nativity, but in Nazareth, but the Church of the Annunciation. I can't remember what it's. Anyway, it's a church, and they were going to do the same thing, blasted but the Israeli government stopped them and said, no, we are not going to do that. But it is the story of attempting to wipe out the people of God. It's kind of full circle, because that's what Herod was trying to do. He was trying to kill Jesus as a baby. Here, 2,000 years later, in the same place, the devil is up to the same things. He's trying to prevent the kingdom of God, King Jesus, from ruling. And so they do it in a different way, but it's the same intent, and in many cases the same methods that they've been using for 2,000 years. But the goal is always to eliminate the gospel. How's that going to work out? It's not going to work out. It can be pretty brutal and pretty painful in the short run, but in the long run, the gospel will prevail and Jesus Christ will come into his kingdom and will be King of the Jews and King of Kings. The battle is being waged, and each of us in our own way are fighting the battle. We need to keep in focus that we are in fact fighting the battle. And this is God's work. It's a part of establishing his kingdom on the earth so that the glory of God would fill the whole earth. And when we build a church, when we build a family that's built on Christ, we are doing the Lord's work. And we are fighting the battle. Our moment in time is not, at this moment in time, to fight in physical senses, though some of you have been in the military, and I think you have fought God's battle many times over the years. I mean, I really think like Afghanistan was God's battle, and Iraq was God's battle. I think there's been a lot of ways in which Americans have fought God's battles over the centuries. But mostly we don't fight in a physical way. We fight in other ways. But building a church, raising a family, this is to do battle. This is what it's all about. When you can raise a family to serve Christ, and even if you're not successful in every way, but if you're making the effort to raise a family to serve Christ, you are doing your part. And that's about as fundamental as it can get. But that is what we do, and we're part of something bigger, so we're not just living our lives, by ourselves in some meaningless existence. We're part of the kingdom of God. And we do what we can do with the strength that we have at any given moment, to advance the kingdom. But it is what we're doing. We're advancing the kingdom of God. And we're fighting against the enemies of God. In the same way that Herod came after Jesus back then, the Herod of our souls is after him still, and we fight back. We do it in God's way. I love the 36th Psalm. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains, your justice like the great deep. O Lord, you preserve both man and beast. How priceless is your unfailing love. Both high and low among men find refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Continue your love to those who know you, your righteousness to the upright in heart. May the foot of the proud not come against me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. See how the evildoers lie fallen, thrown down, not able to rise. They have been defeated, but we have not been. Anybody with a comment or question on the life of Christ in Bethlehem? No? Okay. Let's we're doing good. Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. When did you hear that? Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many years that battle's been going on. But it is fighting the fight, right? Yeah, and I appreciate Alliance Defending Freedom and the role they've played in all of that, because they've carried the ball. And I think I've told you that Kristen Wagner was one of our deacons, and she was head of Alliance Defending Freedom, and she's a feisty lawyer, I'll tell you. She was on the deacon board. I can't say that having a feisty lawyer on your deacon board is necessarily always a good thing, but but we did get along, and that was important. Okay, anybody else? All right, well, we'll let you go party. So what are you going to do? You're going to move the time up for lunch? Still 12:15. Okay, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word that reveals what your plan is and what you're up to. We thank you, Lord, for your victory, and we thank you that you've included us in that victory, that through Jesus Christ our sins are forgiven, our home in heaven is secured, our future is wonderful because of who you are and what you have done. I thank you for it. Now, Lord, I ask you to be with each one who is here today and those who are joining us online and those who wish they could be here but because of sickness are not. I pray you'll be with each and every one. In Jesus' name, amen.